Lord Jesus, I just thank you for this day. I thank you for relationships, and I thank you for community, and I'm just so grateful for everybody in this room. And I just pray this morning as we start talking about how you've made us, each individual, how you've given us different gifts and different things to do, Lord, I just pray that you would just open our eyes and our hearts to learn from you and from each other, and that we would learn to recognize the value that each of us bring to this community and to this world. In your name, amen. All right. Well, we've been talking this week, kind of looking at the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And we are going to kind of continue in that theme of how do we love our neighbor well, how do we love in community. But today we're going to kind of take a little bit of a sidebar. And part of that is I want you to think through, and I don't know if you've ever tripped up on this, but when the Bible says love your neighbor as yourself, I had a season in my life where I was like, I don't know what that means because I don't actually love myself. In fact, I had a season in my life where I hated myself to the point where I almost committed suicide, had that moment where I was just like, this world does not need me. I don't have anything good to offer. And it's not the love yourself as in like what we talked about that firstly, that turned in love, where we're going, oh, this is like that earthly love where I'm sinning and I'm actually only focused selfishly on myself. But I think what Jesus is getting at and what we're after here is this idea of, do we love the image of God that he's made in us? Like when we're to love our neighbor as ourself, I think we are called to love the imaged person that God has created in us. And each of us is made unique. Each of us is made very different. We have different personalities, different ways of stepping into life. And so today I really want to look at the idea of what is your voice? What is your leadership voice and how has God made you to be? I know that somebody came, I don't know how long ago, you guys did like a series on the Enneagram, right? So that kind of gave you a little insight into some of the things about your personality. Today I want to talk about what does your leadership voice look like? And you may go, well, I don't want to be a leader. I don't feel like I'm a leader. Well, you do have to lead yourself in this life. And really I think we have to when we're talking about loving our neighbor, we have to lead ourselves into that space of loving our neighbor. And I think that starts with going, do I actually appreciate who God has made me to be? As a unique person, as an individual, that we each have different ways of contributing into what God is doing in this world. We're really, I always love this idea of like, Jesus, I just want to participate with you in what you're doing in people's lives. I want to participate with you in what you're doing in this world and what part can I play? And so today we're kind of going to have some fun. I want you to explore just what does it mean to be you? And I want you to try internally to be honest about that with yourself and go, I really want to try to evaluate, like, what is my personality? Like, how was I made to be? And I think we're going to kind of identify some of those things as you go through this thing called 5 Voices. I first came across this probably 3-4 years ago. And I've been involved in kind of working with people and understanding. I love kind of self-assessments and understanding more about my giftings, things like that. And especially because it helps me understand other people. The more that we can kind of really dial into not just our own personality, but when we really get to recognize, like, what is my neighbor's personality? Like what makes them tick? What makes them operate? It kind of gives us this sort of relational shorthand. Does anybody know what shorthand means? This is an old term. Shorthand is a way that they used to, when somebody was dictating, when someone was speaking, people would write in what's called shorthand. Like if you had an administrator or secretary, she would write in shorthand, which is like a different type of way of writing where you can write really quickly to keep up with somebody as they're talking. Well, relational shorthand, what that is if I can understand how other people work, then it actually allows me to think through strategically, how can I work well with them? How can I bring out the best in them? And really that they can show up in a way that they actually feel like they get to participate in this world with what God wants them to do. And so often we're so focused, like our pictures yesterday, on our own picture, that sometimes we don't recognize and listen to what other people's pictures are. And so I don't want you to just think only about yourself today. I really want you to dive into what is my voice, but I also want you to hear from each other as you're living in community together. Like, who are my brothers and sisters that are here? How were they made to operate? Like, how do they work and how do they show up in this world? So we're going to kind of go through this thing. All right. So we're going to go through this packet. I'm going to walk through I have my little workbook here too, so I'm going to go through this with you. And of each of what's called the 5 voices. So there's sort of 5 voices or 5 ways that people sort of show up in this world. I want you to identify, first of all, your foundational leadership voice. So we all have sort of the 5, what we would call the 5 voices. We all have these at some capacity. Just some are way easier for us to access. They're natural to us. They're sort of, they really show up in sort of that unconscious competence where we don't even have to think about it. It's like, oh yeah, that's the way that I tend to show up. So we want to be able to identify. I want you to be able to identify especially your first foundational voice. And then I want you to be able to build confidence in using that foundational leadership voice in your life and with other people, all right? And then the fourth one is I'm going to ask you to kind of commit to applying some of the insights that you get for yourself as you're going through this. And at the end of each kind of section, I'm going to have you take some time to just go, okay, what are 2 things that I want to kind of focus on? Maybe that I kind of go, oh, wow, that rang true for me, and it's an area that I kind of want to work on. I want you to kind of commit to going, okay, I'm going to write those down, and these are things that I'm going to kind of focus on over the next weeks, months, honestly, years of kind of developing and growing so that I can actually understand myself better and I can show up in a different way in this world. Everyone speaks, but not everyone is ever heard. Do you think that's true? I mean, we saw that happen yesterday in here, right? So when we started playing the game yesterday of Zoom, level is going up, and as your volume level is going up, other people are going, oh my goodness, there's no way I can compete with these loud voices. I'm going to get quieter, and I'm going to start kind of shutting down or just not saying anything because there's competing voices in this room, and I can't keep up with these loud voices. Everyone was still speaking, but sometimes not everyone is always heard, and we see this. Consequently, teams or even communities. So when we see teams here, I use a lot of this with organizations and teams. I do this with Bible Project. I work with their teams and help them kind of think through how do they lead together. They have 127 people on staff. So there's a lot of staff members, a lot of different opinions, thoughts, and so trying to help them to be as efficient as possible so that they can make a greater impact and have influence. But teams or communities function at less than 60% of their true potential. And that's because there's so many of the voices and so many ideas that never get heard because they get drowned out by other voices in the room. And so we're going to talk about this. 82% of team members or communities feel misunderstood and undervalued. 82% often feel misunderstood and they feel undervalued by the people that are around them. Team leaders rarely, if ever, hear the truth from their people. Sometimes that's because team leaders don't have the ears to hear the people. Sometimes it's because people are afraid of them or afraid of what they might say or how they might respond, and so they just don't share their opinion or they don't share thoughts or feelings because they're like, this person's going to blow up or they're going to get confrontational. I don't like that. It stresses me out. I'm just not even going to bring it up. So team leaders rarely, if ever, hear the truth from the people that they're leading. And then leaders undermine their influence every day without even knowing it. We don't sometimes recognize when we're leading that we're actually undermining the influence that we can have with the people that are around us. All right. So what if every voice around your table was truly heard, valued, and appreciated? And I want to ask that question. Like, if you felt like you were in a community where every single person, their voice and what they had to say and what they had to contribute was truly valued, how do you think it would shape and change our communities? What do you think? Any thoughts? Do you think it'd be different? How would it be different?
People wouldn't be fighting all the time.
Mm-hmm. You mean people fight? Conflict happens in every single community, whether it's in your home community, like my son Adric and my daughter Brinley, fighting all the time, me getting angry that they're fighting, and then it's just conflict all the time. I'm the dad, and I have, as I'll talk about my voice later, I have a pretty loud voice. So I can just dominate the conversation, and then their contributions to what they're thinking and feeling often aren't heard because I drown them out. If every voice was heard, valued, and appreciated, we'd be really different. What are some other ways that if everybody's voice and everybody's thoughts and feelings were recognized, and what else would be different, Ezra? Our community would be smarter. Can you unpack that a little more? What do you mean by that?
Like sometimes we overlook certain people or we overlook certain things, but deep down those are probably very good and very insightful.
Yes.
Kind of overlook it because somebody else has an idea that's already like kind of sprouting into an actual action.
So good, bro. 100%. 100%. That there's often people have ideas, thoughts, they have perspectives on the way that other people are feeling in the room, and if they're not heard, then we don't have that peace in our community to help us be healthier and stronger. So that's absolutely true. Any other ways? Yes. Yes, Ireland. That is that again, perfect. That if we actually had opportunity for everyone to share, so often, and we're going to talk about the creative voice, but so often are people that actually can envision the future, that can think out of the box, that have ideas, they don't get their ideas heard because somebody who has a louder, stronger voice doesn't care about anybody else's perspective, and they think they're always right. And so then we don't get some of those voices in the room that actually could help us move further and have a greater impact. Totally. One last one. Anybody have any thoughts what it would look like if this was truly there? Yes.
Like downside, I guess, but like it might, certain things might take a lot longer to get done if we did that. Like not in like a bad way, but like because like we'd be able to kind of flush out what the best possible idea is and hear everybody, like it would just be like a little bit of a longer process, but definitely like a more thorough process.
Absolutely. It's a horror, right? Yes, absolutely. So if we had that, then it might take more time, but we would actually all, as a group and as a community, feel more confident in the way that we're moving forward, rather than like, all right, I'm just on for the ride because so-and-so's kind of, it's his way or the highway, or it's her way or the highway, and so we're just going to do this, and it might take a little longer, but I think there's other perspectives in the room, and not everybody's getting to put their perspective out there. Absolutely. This is an amazing tool. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about this because this has been, for me personally, has been something that's been super valuable. It's called Know Yourself to Lead Yourself. So in order to lead ourselves into the way that we live into community, we actually have to truly understand how we're wired and how we know ourselves. And we all have tendencies, right? So if we look at the bottom here, we all have tendencies. So for example, I have a tendency to talk a lot. I get excited, I want to talk about things, and I have a tendency, no matter what the situation is, if somebody throws a question in the room or whatever, I start getting excited and I want to talk about it, and I want to talk. That tendency will probably never go away. Like I have that tendency to want to jump in and talk about things because I get excited. So we all have tendencies, but some of our tendencies are for good, and some of our tendencies actually create negative impacts in our life. And there's patterns where those tendencies tend to show up. So for sometimes it's like if I'm in a meeting with people, when I was running an organization, the church, I was called the chief of staff, and I had 43 staff members under me. And when we would be in staff meetings, I would have different tendencies that would show up, patterns where they showed up, where some of those tendencies, sometimes bad tendencies, would tend to show up more than in other places. So there's different patterns of where those tendencies show up. But each of those tendencies has an action. It looks like something. So an example, using my example, somebody who likes to jump in, talk a lot, I get excited. I would have a tendency to be the first person in a meeting to speak first. I would jump in, be like, I got an idea, let's do this. And I would have an action where I start talking, I get excited, I try to sell it, and I'm trying to tell stories and get everybody on board. And it would look like, oh yeah, dude, you took up 20 minutes of our meeting time just trying to get excited about what you're saying, and you don't even realize you talked for 20 minutes. You think you only talked for like 5 minutes, but like the meeting's almost halfway over. Like the action looked like I was spending so much time taking up meeting time. Those actions inevitably lead to consequences. And I'll tell you a story. This is probably about 15 years ago. Actually, more than that. 17 years ago, I was working, I ran the residence program at a university. And I had two colleagues. They were amazing women. I really appreciated and loved them a lot. And I like to be liked, and I love people. I always think that everybody likes me. And we had a meeting, and we were trying to decide what we were going to do for our RA. I ran the resident assistant program. I had 33 RAs. And we were going to do our retreat and kind of do some leadership training. And so, we had a staff meeting for the student services department. And they said, so what are you guys thinking for this fall? Like, what are we going to do as we do RA training? So I jumped right in and started sharing what we're going to do. And I started talking about all the things the ideas that I had and what we were going to do, what we were going to do. And all of a sudden, both of my counterparts started crying in the meeting. And I was like, oh, what is going on? You guys, come on. We're trying to sell this thing. And, my boss was an amazing mentor and a really great guy, and he stopped me and he said, I happen to notice that both of you kind of are, there's some tears in the room. Can we talk about that a little bit? And they both go, we just hate working with Ben. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, everybody loves working with me. Like, how can you hate working with me? And they go, every time we have something like this, it's always his ideas. It's always his thing that we go with. And we had some ideas, and we feel like we put those out there, and now he's pitching something that he came up with. And our ideas, they just never, we don't feel like we're valued and appreciated, and it feels like we don't get to contribute, and it's always what Ben wants to do. I was devastated, because in my mind, I was like, well, no, we talked about this last week. We liked my idea, right? And I had not actually listened to them. My actions had a consequence, and the consequence was that these two girls that I really loved and I liked working with, they actually said they hate working with me, which was devastating to me. I was so bummed. And luckily, my boss is amazing. He pulled me aside and we talked through it. And I had to go back to them and apologize and go, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that often I don't actually ask what you're thinking. And even if I do, I'm not really listening because I'm just trying to get you, I'm hoping you're going to get done with your thing that you're talking about so we can get back to what I want to talk about. There was a consequence to that. And that consequence created a reality for me. And the reality was that I worked with two people who didn't feel valued, didn't feel like they contribute, and they didn't want to work with me anymore, and they'd rather not be there if I was going to stay there. Super hard for me. I had to do a lot of work in my life to try to fix that because I didn't want to minimize the impact and the influence that I could have in a team, in these people that I worked with, if my tendency was causing a reality for me that made things really hard for other people. So we all have tendencies, right? Do you know some of your own tendencies that kind of sometimes come up, sometimes create bad realities for you? We have those. We're going to talk about a few of those. We're going to go kind of deeper into this later. But I want you to think about that as we're going through this, that we all have tendencies and patterns where they show up. There's actions and what it looks like, and then they create consequences. And those consequences, we have to live with them because they create reality for us and for other people around us and how we show up in community. All right. Here's the 5 voices. There's the nurturer, the creative, the guardian, the connector, and the pioneer. And if you'll notice, there's like a little decibel level. There's a volume sign. And that's the volume level that each of these voices bring to the table. So when I'm talking about volume, it doesn't always necessarily mean loud, but it does mean that, for instance, nurturers, which we would say is this first voice here, they tend to be a little bit quieter. They have amazing things to say, but they're not going to fight you to put their voice in the room. They're not going to be yelling and going, no, you need to listen to my idea. Nurturers are going to go, hey, you know what? I like harmony. I'm not trying to create, I'll just sit and listen. I'm not going to try to make everybody listen to me. Creatives, their voice often they're the second loudest voice or second quietest voice. And it's not always because their volume level is kind of quieter, but sometimes it's really hard to understand what a creative is trying to say. They have an idea, they're trying to flesh it out, and people are going, you're so confusing. That's not even what we were talking about. And so they often can hold back because they have a hard time sometimes sharing some of those things. Guardians, you will hear your guardians. So that's our third loudest voice, or third going that way. Your guardian you're going to hear your guardians because they really care about due diligence. They want to make sure that, they tend to be rule followers. They care about the values and what we promise that we're going to deliver. And so they want to make sure that the right questions are asked. They're going to be asking their questions and saying, have we really thought through this well? Have we made sure that we're on the right track? Those are our guardians. Your connector, you're always going to hear your connector because they are like Tigger. They're loud, they love to tell stories, they like to jump in, they're very personable, and so you're always going to hear that connector voice. And then your pioneer is your loudest voice, not only just with volume sometimes, but also the force in which they say things. So they're very confident in their opinion, their perspective, and so when they bring the power of their pioneer voice, it tends to be sort of the loudest voice in the room. They tend to dominate often the conversations in the way that we're operating. Okay? So that's the order that we're going in here. We're going to talk through these things. All right, assumptions as we start this. Our voice is made up of all 5 voices. So I said that you all have all of the 5 voices in you, and you have access to them, but some of your voices are more naturally kind of that first voice where you're like, this one is easy for me to access. Your 5th voice, probably, you're like, I don't often, I'm not able to access that voice very easily. It's harder for me to live this way and to think this way. Some voices are more natural to us than others. So like I said, some just, they come more naturally and they flow. Maturity allows us to value the contribution each voice brings. So when we start growing in our maturity, that's when we're able to turn away from just going, oh, this is what I think about myself, and go, actually, I recognize like the value that each of these voices brings to a community and to a team. And maturity says, hey, we need each other. We need different parts of the body. We need different people to actually make us efficient and to maximize the impact that we can have. Nature, nurture, and choice have all played a part in your voice. So our nature is the way that we're naturally designed and made. Nurture is how we were raised, the environment that we grew up in. For some people, they may naturally have sort of a louder voice, but that voice was quieted, told to, you need to stop talking. I grew up in a home, my grandfather was a major in the military. It was like children are meant to be seen and not heard. And so it's sort of, depending on the nature and the place that we grew up, or our nurture, that can affect the way that we show up sometimes. Sometimes it can be abuse, it can be because of, bad parenting, because of bullying, all those kind of things, they can affect the way that we think and feel. Don't assume that you know what someone else's foundational voice is. So we love to tend to label people. I love Enneagram, but sometimes the problem with Enneagram is everybody goes, oh, you're an 8, you're a 7, you're a 2, you're a 1. We can tend to try to tell other people what they are. I want you to just try to own what your voice is and think about that today and learn about the other voices. And so don't assume that you necessarily know what someone else's voice is, because that nature, nurture, or choice can affect the way that they show up. I didn't talk about choice. Choice is just the way that we choose to kind of interact with the world. And then finally, don't assume that you know what each word means. So, each of these voices has a title, but it doesn't necessarily, let me help define. I'm going to do the best I can to define what the voices mean. So like creative, we're going to get there, like it's popular to be sort of a creative artist. Just because you're a different voice doesn't mean you're not an artist. So like, don't let that taint the way that you're going, oh, well, I'm an artist. I have to show up as creative first voice because it will show that I'm an artist. No, it doesn't mean that. Let me define what they mean. We have all different contexts for pioneer and what we think a pioneer means, all these different things. So let me help define them. All right, here's how you're going to rate your voice. So you'll see on that first page, nurture. So if you can turn to the nurture page, we have green, yellow, and red. And what I want you to do is, as I'm describing what each aspect of these voices, I just want you can just take your pen and put like a G for green, you can put a Y for yellow, R for red. Green is your foundational voice. It's my default pattern of communicating and thinking. So it's just like, this is something that it's like someone read my mail. Like the way you're talking about this is me 100%, that would be green. Yellow would be like, yes, sometimes I definitely can access that voice. I feel that come out in me a lot, but it's not quite green. It's not like I'm always like that. That's sort of yellow. Red is it's not my foundational voice. I find it kind of hard to value, and it's harder for me to access. It's like, yeah, maybe I even aspire to be that way, but I just know that I'm not an organized person, or I'm not naturally like super, I'm not going to always be the one that's going to command the room. That just doesn't really sound like me. That would be sort of red. And then just because I'm kind, I'm nice, I will allow you also to do shades. So you could have a green with a shade of yellow, yellow with a shade of green, yellow, yellow with a shade of red, red with a shade of yellow, or red. Does that make sense? So then you can just do like GY if it's like, oh, I'm green with a shade of yellow. Or maybe it's like, it's not totally not me, but it's pretty much not me. It's kind of a YR, yellow, red. So as I'm going through, I just want you to write next to each of these bullet points, kind of just put a little G or R or Y or YR or whatever it might be next to it. And then we're going to try to identify where you feel like, what color you feel like you end up with each of these, and then we'll put your voice orders in place. Okay? All right, let me get to my first page here. All right, so we're going to start with the nurturer, which is, again, naturally the quietest voice. They're champion of people, relational harmony, and values, okay? Our nurturers, so here we go. Our natures, they intuitively feel how others will react to a new idea. The nurturers are our most emotionally intelligent and relationally connected of all of the voices. So they're very connected that way. It's almost like a nurturer is like, they're like a spider in a web, and they can feel the vibrations of everybody's feelings in a room. Our nurturers know actually how everybody is responding. Our nurturers yesterday in the room when we were going through that Zoom game, I guarantee you, your nurturers going, oh, this person's angry. I can tell they're frustrated. This person's over it. This person's like feeling stressed out and anxious. Our nurturers actually are like that spider. They can feel the vibrations of the community, and they kind of know where everybody is coming from. That's our nurturer. They actively feel that way. Did I go the right way? Am I going backwards? What just happened? Oh, I thought they had bullet points. All right. They defend values. People will always come before profit. So our nurturers, they care more about people. They could care less if you're in a business. They could care less about how much money we make. They really value the people, the staff in an organization, how we're working our clients. In a community, they're going, yeah, we have goals that we want to achieve, but if it hurts people on the way, like, what's the point? Like nurturers, they really value people. They're extremely relational. They're kind of that relational oil in a machine. Oh, I keep doing this. They function as that relational oil inside teams and organizations. So if you think about like a car engine, like there's all sorts of sharp moving parts. There's things that would be grinding. If you didn't have that oil in an engine of a car, then things would be grinding, right? You just hear this, you'd feel conflict all the time. And it's our nurturers in our communities that actually help move things along. They're that relational oil. They're the person that when they see somebody in a room who gets their feelings hurt, they get blasted by one of the other voices, and they read it and they go, I can tell that something's going on in that person. They're the ones who will step aside with them on the side and say, hey, how are you doing? Like, I feel like there was something going on for you in that Zoom thing or whatever we were doing. Like, whatever happened in that relationship or that situation, like it seemed like you were a little bit off. And they're the ones that are going to put your arm around you and check in on you. They're that relational oil in our communities who actually help us flow and help us really work well. They're pragmatic realists who ask, has this really been thought through? Our nurturers feel responsible for our people and our values in a community. So they can't help it. They really ask, has this really been thought through? And the reason they ask that is because, okay, if we're going to make this decision and we're going to do this thing, like, have we thought through how it's going to affect everyone? Like, I know you guys are really excited about this idea, but that means like 10 of the people are going to get left behind. Like, have you guys thought about that? Like, we're going to be hurting some of the people in our team, in our community. Like, we can't do that. I have a friend who actually, my wife is, Daisha is a nurturer, but my friend's wife, one time he's a pioneer, and he was kind of like, he was like talking with his wife over dinner, and he's like, you know, they lived in England at the time. He's like, you know what I think we need to do? I've just been praying about it, thinking about it. I think we actually need to move. Like, I think that a lot of our businesses in the United States right now, I think we need to move to the U.S. and we need to start kind of thinking through these things. And she's like, and he's just talking and being his pioneer voice. He's talking a lot about his ideas and vision and how they're going to do it. They go to bed. Next morning, they wake up, and she is just like exhausted. And he's like, what's going on? And she's like, oh, I've been up all night. I've been making a list of all the people that we're going to need to connect with, and we need to have like some sort of opportunity to say goodbye to them. I've been even already looking at houses, and I've been just trying to think of where we're going to live and what kind of community we want to live in. And he's like, oh, I wasn't thinking, I'm thinking like 3 years from now. Like, I'm not even thinking it. And she's like, well, why didn't you say that? Like, I thought you made it sound like we're going to move right away. And I started thinking about all the people that we love and care for, and we're leaving our community. And again, that relational oil. They want to ask, has this really been thought through? Because if we're actually doing it, I'm going to be head down thinking about all the people that are impacted by this in the community that we live in. And I really want to make sure that we're taking care of people and we're closing up those relationships well. I'm thinking about my kids, and are they going to go to the right school, and how are they going to make friends, and how are they going to interact with their nurturers are always thinking about those kind of things. They're natural team players. Nurturers like to make others feel, oh, actually I skipped one. They take genuine delight in celebrating the achievements of others. Nurturers of all the voices, they take delight in other people succeeding more than any other voice. Nurturers actually sometimes they take more delight in other people achieving things and lifting people up than even themselves. In fact, a lot of nurturers, they don't like to be celebrated. They don't like to be like, hey, come up on stage in front of everybody. We want to thank you for this. Nurturers like, no, you don't need to do that. Like, I don't really like being on stage in front of everybody. I'm okay, I don't need that. But they love to celebrate other people. They love to delight in people's achievements and who people are. That's a nurturer. Again, they're natural team players. They like to make other people look good. Often nurturers have no problem serving behind the scenes. They love to support people. They love to be a part of it. They don't need the congratulations or the thank you necessarily, but they love to feel like, hey, I contributed. Even if other people didn't see it, I know that I played a big part in how we got to where we are. That's the way that nurturers often, they're great team players. They also can become overly resistant to change and demonstrate passive-aggressive tendencies. So nurturers, sometimes change is harder for a nurturer. They tend to be more present-minded because they're thinking about all the impacts of how it's going to affect everybody. Change, they're just constantly thinking through, oh my goodness, like all the people that are going to be impacted by this, like that is really hard for me. Change is typically harder for nurturers. And therefore, sometimes they can show passive-aggressive tendencies, which could look like this. Somebody goes, a big change is made, and it totally tanks. It doesn't work out. It was a bad decision. And your nurturer speaks up and goes, I knew it was going to be like this. Like, I totally knew this was going to happen. And everybody else in the room is going, well, great. Thanks for telling us earlier. Like, why didn't you speak up and share something? You could have helped us avoid a major catastrophe because this is a disaster. That's that a passive-aggressive. They can sometimes afterwards go, oh, I knew that this was going to happen. I saw all along. Nobody would listen to me. Nobody asked my opinion. It's like, well, why didn't you just speak up and share that? You could have helped us avoid this. So that's the way that they are. They can be over-resistant to change. Nurturers, they rarely value the contribution that they make. They have a harder time sometimes recognizing the value that they bring. They see the value in everyone else, but a nurturer sometimes can feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. If you're familiar sometimes with 5 Ways, they talk about the critic. A lot of times nurturers have that critic on their shoulder that's saying, you're not good enough. You're not doing enough. You could have done so much more. You could have done so much more for this person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So nurturers rarely value the contribution that they can make, and so they have a harder time sometimes with self-esteem and going, I actually bring a lot to the table, and I'm proud of who I am. They're kind of always feeling like they're a little bit behind and trying to play catch up. Okay? So that's the nurturers. So what I want you to do now is I want you to populate, I want you to think through all those colors, I want you to add them up, and then I want you to try to rate as much as possible what would be the color. So if you look and you go, oh man, I have a whole bunch of greens, then probably you're probably green. Maybe you're going like, yeah, I have some greens, but maybe not. I've got some yellows and even a couple reds. Then you might be like, okay, try to figure out what color do you think that nurture is for you. Take a couple minutes to think about it, and then I want you to turn to a couple if you're sitting at a table with three of you can talk. If you're sitting with four, just turn to the person next to you, and I want you to share what color you came up with and why you think that was your color. Okay, take a couple minutes. All right. 30 more seconds. If you haven't shared yet, then take a chance to share. All right, we got that? Okay. We just did that. All right. So our nurturers tend to be they're 43% of our overall population. So there's more nurturers than any other voice. They're champion people, relational harmony, and values, but 43% of the population are typically nurturers. Yes? You just hit my next point. You did? No, it's great. Out of that 43%, 70% of nurturers are women. And it's not, if you're a guy and you're a nurturer, that's not like, oh, I'm more feminine or anything like that. It's just the reality of the way that things, we'll talk about one of the other voices that tends to be more men. But nurturers, 43% are, 70% tend to be nurturers. Just out of curiosity, how many people would say they think they might be a first voice nurturer? Raise your hands high. I know nurturers. Use that voice. Don't be afraid of sticking your hand up. Everybody needs to be able to see you. I know I see a lot of this. I want it up so everybody can see you. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So 9 people out of 28. We're getting there. You may actually get through this and you may go, actually, now that I've gone through all the 5 voices, I realize I'm a nurturer. You may change it. It's okay. You don't have to fully know now because you got to hear all the voices. Just want to get a feel for it. Yes?
So this was like something I was thinking as we were going through it. I was like, oh, I used to be a lot stronger in these tendencies like a couple of years ago, but not as much anymore. So is it something that you can grow like more in one?
It's a great question.
Kind of change?
Great question. So we talked about nurture. As we often heal from some of those rooms and we come to understand who we actually are, sometimes we're able to recognize, okay, I actually am something different. Let me give you an example. This often happens when I do these things. A lot of time, there's women that often will get to the pioneer voice, but there's women who actually have a natural inclination. Their natural is to be more of a commanding leader. They like to jump in, but they've been told their whole life, stop telling people what to do. That's not your role as a woman. You're supposed to be subservient. You're supposed to, and so nurture has told them to be quieter, to not value the power that they can have in their voice. And so, like you said, the nurture often can change the way that we show up in a room, because the way that we've been nurtured is to be a certain way because that's what somebody else thinks we should be, rather than who we were designed to be and who we naturally are. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Let's move on to create or nurtures. All right, this is just a little infographic, kind of helps you think through some of the main pieces of them. How to empower a nurturer. We want to let them speak first and affirm their competence and the genuine value of their contribution to a group and to a community. All right, our creatives. Creatives are the champion of future ideas, innovation, and organizational integrity. So let's get into the creative. The creative voice is probably the voice that people have the hardest time understanding. So when creatives are often talking, it's just hard to always understand what they're trying to get across. Sometimes they don't make a lot of sense, or it's like, where did that come from? Like, we weren't even talking about that. And creative throws an idea, and it's like, man, you went way off topic. Well, I was kind of daydreaming. I was in my head, and I was thinking about something. I just had to get it out. So creatives, sometimes people struggle to understand the creative voice, often when it's speaking. They are conceptual architects and love to think outside the box. So they're the ones who see the future first. They're sort of, if you've heard the term early adopters, creatives are often, they can't help it. They're just always out there. They're thinking, my friend John that was here last week, he is a hardcore creative. You may not have guessed that because he's teaching, but he's always the one that's like, dude, you got to check this thing out. Like, check out ChatGPT and what I'm able to do on it. Like, he was telling me about AI before I was ever even thinking about it. He's always innovating, always thinking about new creative ideas, ways that we can do things. He's very much a creative voice. They're always thinking to the future. They're always thinking about new ways of thinking about things. They can think out of the box, where I'm like, how did you come up with that idea? That seems crazy, but the more I talk about it, that's pretty genius. That's the creative voice. So they're conceptual architects. They love to think out of the box. They function as an early warning radar system for teams and communities, often seeing the opportunities and dangers long before everyone else sees them. So they kind of can see into the future, even as a community or as a team, and they can go, I don't know. I don't think this is going to go well. Or they can be like, this is if we did this, it would change the game for us. Like, they can think way into the future in ways that the rest of the voices can't. But they're often like, have you ever heard about the canary in coal mines? Do you guys know that illustration? Like, back in the day, they used to send canaries down in the coal mines. And if the canary went down there and it came back out, then they know it was safe to go down there because there's not any fumes, chemicals that could kill them. Often if the canary died when it was in the coal mine, they'd be like, all right, we can't go down there, it's safe. I'm sorry if you're a lover of birds, but that's just what happened. That's what they used to do. That's like our creative. Our creatives kind of can sense if there's someone in a group or in a team, or if there's something that's a threat that might hurt the way that we're doing. And you might be like, no, what are you talking about? That person's great. And they're like, I don't know, there's something just a little bit off. I feel like they have an agenda, or there's something that they can sense sometimes when something is a little bit off. And that's our creative. They can see that way before everybody else can. They can sense when something's a little bit off. They're never satisfied with the status quo. They inherently believe that things can always be better. So they're always innovating. They're always thinking, how can we reshape this? How can we do it differently? How can we we could strategically probably do something different. Or this is just not functional. The way that this room is set up, it just doesn't seem to, it's not the best optimal way that we could be operating in here. Creatives are always reinventing. They're wanting to make things better all of the time. They're thinking through those things. If the vision is compelling, the word can't is not in their vocabulary. So if a creative catches a vision for the way that something could be different, people are like, you know what, that is way too difficult. That is way too challenging. There's no way. The creative's always gonna be like, no, if we could do this, it would be a game changer. Creatives, they will always go, no, give me some time. I need to get this concept in my head, but I think we can make this work. I think we can figure it out. Creatives will always try to figure a way to make things happen. They don't like the word can't. They want to rethink through it. They'll get there. They often struggle with the fact that people never seem to fully understand my ideas. This is very true of creatives. They will come out and start saying something, and everybody's kind of going, dude, I don't really know what you're talking about. Like, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And they're like, come on, you guys, like, it's like this thing, it's like da-da-da-da-da. And people are going, okay, like, it's okay, man, we don't get it. So often creatives, they have a hard time articulating, and they have so many ideas in their head, and they have a hard time saying it in a way that everybody's going to clearly understand it. And therefore, we're going to talk about how you draw out creatives and ask them questions to help them find clarity, because often their ideas are genius. They just don't know always how to articulate them very clearly. That's why I'm saying people sometimes struggle to understand a creative when they're trying to talk, because it's just sometimes beyond what people can think in the future, or they just haven't really been able to articulate it in their vocabulary the way that it is in their head. Very much the way it is. They often struggle with the fact that people never, I just did that one. They exhibit a strong social conscience and desire for personal and organizational integrity. They always want to believe, are we good news for the people that are around us and for our organization? They recognize organizational values and integrity are huge for creatives. Do we mean what we say? If we promise we're going to do it, can we keep our promise? Like, creatives are thinking about that. They have a deep value system, and they believe in the integrity of the values that an organization or a community has, and they're going to hold to those because that's the rules that they're running by. And they're like, okay, this is what we've decided upon. Does everything fit into that? We've got it, they're creative. They're also going, this is what we decided. How can we expand this way? But they're really organizational integrity, community integrity is very, very important to creatives. Being internal perfectionists, they can often fail to celebrate the 90% that has been achieved, focusing instead on the 10% that doesn't or hasn't been achieved. So sometimes when you have a community event and the creative was helping design some of the ways that things went, and it's like, oh my goodness, that party was way better than we could have ever imagined. Let's celebrate. Let's go out. And the creative's going, yeah, but but we made that one meal, and I feel like some people didn't like that one meal. I should have added more salt, or if they're the cook. They're always thinking about the 10% that wasn't achieved. They have a harder time sometimes in that space of recognizing, like, okay, like, let's just celebrate. We got 90% awesome. That's good enough. Creatives always want it to be better. They're always going, like, that 10% they're going to focus on, like, oh, if we could have just did this one thing differently, or I should have thought about this. I didn't think about the fact that it's going to get hot in here and we didn't have the windows open. Or they're always thinking about those kind of things. Okay? So that's the creative. All right. So I want you to try to rate that. Rate that again, and then take a couple minutes to talk about it, and then we're going to take a break. Okay? And we'll get on to the next voices. So try to rate yourself, and then again, turn to somebody and talk about why you think you were the color that you were. What do you think, Gabe? Mm-hmm. I was thinking that was probably you. Mm-hmm. When we were talking last night, I'm like, here's my creative. Stella, what'd you think? Yellow. Hey, I was going to tell you too, I'm going to have to figure out another time. Rick he wanted to take our family to lunch and then take us to Kennedy. But I'm here till Sunday, so if we can figure out another time to reschedule, because I really want to meet with you guys. So let's try to figure out afterwards, and then we can kind of figure out when we can do that. I'm so sorry. Like, he texted me yesterday, and I tried to find you last night, but someone said you weren't feeling very well, and so I was like, I didn't want to bother you, but yeah. How you feeling today? A little bit better? Oh my goodness. Well, that's significant. Oh, I'm so sorry. Ugh. That's rough. Well, I hope you feel better. That's rough. Well, maybe it's better than you can sleep this afternoon and not have to. Nope. You can take your break as soon as you're done. We'll take a break and we'll come back in a few minutes.